Thank you, everyone, for showing up for the Belief Breakthrough podcast. I am Patrick, your host, and I'm very excited to introduce you to an old friend of mine. Her name is Meg. She has a humongous practice, psychotherapy, and I don't want to chop her or butcher her up apart, and I want her to introduce herself. Before then, I want you to understand this. With this podcast, everyone wants to do more. Everyone wants to grow to this bigger place. But you don't realize is if you don't break past your beliefs, your limiting thoughts, the things that's stopping you, you're always going to sabotage yourself. So in this story, and what we're going to take apart in this Belief Breakthrough podcast is Meg's story, because she has a very important story about how she went from not being the sole income owner to the sole breadwinner. And not only that, succeeding epically. So Meg, please introduce yourself and tell everybody what's going on.
Patrick, thank you so much for having me. My name is Meg Tobin. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in Connecticut and in New York, and I own a group psychotherapy practice. And we treat people with depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, and people who have experienced trauma in their lives. I grew my practice on my own. I was a solo practitioner for a long time. And now I have 6 employees, and I feel very proud of myself.
Well, you should be. Not a lot of people can do that. So we've known each other for a good 8 years, 6 to 8 years. You actually brought my attention to my 6-year-old. So it's at least 6 years deep, and we've grown together for quite some time. We both grew our practices very slowly and surely. But as we all know, growing a practice with kids comes with some issues, some thoughts. So let's start off your story by understanding, I understand your story a little bit. Let's tell everybody why you need to go from a solo practitioner to something really, really big. What was the linchpin that made you go over and start this horrible journey called entrepreneurship?
Yes, it is. It's wonderful and horrible. So I have 4 children. And I spent a lot of time, I did a part-time practice for a lot of their lives, wanting to be present for them, be home. My husband was working full-time and he was the breadwinner. And then 6 years ago, my husband was diagnosed with leukemia. And it really sent a panic through our family, through me. I was still building my practice, not sure at all that I could carry the weight financially for our family, very scared of how that would look. And yet I knew that I had to shift myself past that limiting belief of I can't take care of myself or my family. I need someone else to take care of me financially, which had been a very strong belief in my life. And I did utilize EFT tapping to help me push through some of that, some of those stories that weren't really true, but I believed them to be true.
So where do you think that belief came from that you couldn't take care of your family, and how did that show up? Like when everything came down, like before you knew that was your belief, how did it show up that you were like, oh, wait, there's something here?
It showed up as me immediately thinking, I need to go get a job where someone else is my boss.
Ooh.
Right?
Okay.
So I can't do this by myself. I need to go work for someone else who's built something and they'll pay me and support, I won't have to take care of all of that. Still, someone will be taking care of me, so to speak, because doing it on my own was way scary. And I think initially the belief came from that my mother never worked until I was in college. And I just didn't think women could be breadwinners. It was a gender thing in my family. The boys, I have 2 brothers, the boys and my dad were workers and earners, and the women were not.
So could you talk a little bit more about generational learning? Because that's my whole practice. I go back to the very beginning and say your environment that you grew up in is what you're going to create without you recognizing in some way, shape, or form. But you just jumped a whole bunch of steps here, and you're like, oh, I already knew it's from my parents. But tell me a little bit more about how you take apart generational learning on the psychology side.
Right. So I learned one of the sort of basic tenets, unspoken tenets in my family was that women were less than, girls were not smart enough, fast enough, good enough. And that was, a lot of that was because of my mother's beliefs. In fact, I felt much more supported by my father than by my mother. And so then we look back another generation and look how my mother was raised and how she was treated in her family. And they wanted a boy. They did not want a girl. And that was very clearly spoken to her. That was not an undercurrent. That was something very clear. And so she didn't heal from that and brought that into the family she created. And I soaked it in as a good codependent little girl does. I just watched my mom and learned and did a good job learning her self-limiting beliefs and taking them on as my own. So she did, I have this thought of this, and I've learned this somewhere, this chalkboard behind us, right? That says all of the beliefs that we have about ourselves. And when I think, I need to go build my practice more, I look back at this chalkboard and I see what's been written on it by other people. You can't start your own practice. It's not, you're not capable of being a breadwinner. Those are all the things that are written by other people on this chalkboard behind me. And I keep looking and saying, oh, that's what I'm supposed to believe. And it just happens in a split second. And so what I started to do was erase that chalkboard and decide, what is it that I want to believe about myself? Even if I don't believe it yet, what do I want to believe about myself? That's different from what I learned. So I started challenging the thoughts that I was having based on what I learned, because that was my mother's belief. That doesn't have to be my belief.
How did you get to that point? Like, that's the kicker that a lot of people are going to struggle with, is just the chalkboard analogy is awesome. And understanding what's written on the chalkboard is what you're going to believe. And it's not, might not be yours, so on and so forth. But getting to that point where you're like, oh, I need to look behind me to see what's actually happening. Right. How did you get to that point?
I think it comes from becoming aware, not just sort of living by default, but saying, okay, I'm going to tease apart my belief structure, and I'm going to decide and examine what's mine and what's not mine. And there are beautiful lessons I've learned from my parents, and that I want to keep with me, that really are a core part of who I am, that I choose today to stand by. But there's a whole slew of other stuff that I am not in alignment with anymore. And so for me, it's about being centered and in alignment with the thoughts and the behaviors that I am creating in my life. Because so much of it is unconscious, it requires, I think, at least a sounding board, a coach or a therapist to help you to recognize that these are unconscious things happening, and to have a space that's safe enough to be able to deconstruct that and build back what you want.
So in your practice, you're working with a lot of other therapists. And yes, so far you just let a landmine go off by saying that not only are you doing generational work, you're actually doing multi-generational work. You're looking back further than most people even fathom. Like, most people are not aware of the severity of what happens in their childhood is what's happening now, let alone what happened in your parents' childhood and their parents' childhood in that way. That now dictates the fact that you can't work for yourself. You can't support a family. You can't do anything. And you're going to stay by those old times. But people take that old time thought and they try to make it in this time. And that's where a lot of people get problems in that way.
Right.
So my question to you now is, you knew you were going through this, husband has leukemia, going through the process, and you're now taking apart, deconstructing your past as well as your mom's past. What are some of the experiences you had to go through that everyone's going to have to go through? Like, when you're listening to this, you have to remember we're talking about a story that she's going through, but I guarantee you, with a child like on the betting block, that you were going through a same exact experience, but in your perception, in your world. It's the same exact thing.
Yes.
So you had, I can't, girls are not worth it. Girls can't do it, are not strong enough, fast enough, or whatever the statement you said, as well as I can't support a family. How did that show up after you were just like, I'm going to do it by myself. I can do this. And you haven't erased the chalkboard yet. What are some of the experiences that happened?
Yeah. So there was a lot of fear, lots and lots and lots of fear of, I had to come up against this imposter type fear that like, who's going to listen to me? What right do I have to build this practice? I should just go work for someone else. So lots and lots of fear every day, waking up in like, just like flooded with anxiety and how am I going to do this? But I know I have to do this. And I think the driving force for me was I needed to do this for my children. Right. So if I wasn't going to do it for myself or my husband, I was definitely going to do it for my own kids. And so, and knowing that it would be soul sucking for me to go work for someone else. I didn't think I could survive that either. And so here I am faced with like two really bad, in my mind at that time, really bad choices, right?
Correct.
Go work for someone else or pull up my big girl pants and be brave and do the thing.
Choose right? Your heart.
That scares me the most. And so deconstructing some of those beliefs and really grieving, right? Grieving the loss of some alignment with my mom, letting go of and deciding that I get to be independent and psychologically and emotionally and all these separations from her. It hit me hard at that time because I have a big part of me that wants to remain loyal. We want to remain loyal to our parents. And whether it's conscious or unconscious, we do live out these loyalties. And when I was able to recognize that that's what I was doing and that it doesn't serve her and it doesn't serve me to stay true to those loyalties because they're dysfunctional. So once I began to realize that I could honor her and remain connected and in relationship with her and do what she never could do, and exactly. And then, and then her fears coming into my sphere around me starting a business came up very frequently. She was super negative about it in a lot of ways, but I know it was her fear of me getting hurt or her fear of me not succeeding and then feeling sad or like a failure or something. So I know where it came from, but it was really hard to tease that out and say, I hear your fear, or you know what, Mom, I can't listen to your fear right now. I appreciate you calling, but if you're going to be negative about this, let's talk next week, because right now I'm bolstering myself up. I am like psyching myself out every single day. Like I'm going to do this. And to have a phone call tear that down is really disheartening. And so I had to set some boundaries around that. But mostly I think it was this drive around my responsibility to my kids. Like it's not an option to not provide for them. So I am just going to do whatever it is I need to do. And I'm curious and I'm a learner by nature. And so I invested in some courses and I, really began to specialize in trauma. And then once I've had built up a bit of a belief in myself and like, I'm going to do this, I am doing this, doors opened that I could not have planned. I couldn't have created. I couldn't have made happen. Doors began to open because I was aligned with what my truth is. And I was no longer fighting against where I was supposed to be.
Now that's hard for a lot of people to grasp because in order for you, like that was the last thing that happened that opened the floodgates. And what the world now glorifies is that floodgate opening. Like, oh look, she saw it, and then everything just started happening. But
Ooh,
I like
long
to
road.
it that long road that happens right before then. Like 6 years, we've been,
Yes.
more than 6 years, we've been going through our trials and tribulations as a business owner, let alone a parent, let
Yes.
alone a spouse that was not doing well, right?
Right.
So now it's a place where you're seeing things and you're fighting a parent that's, and this is the big thing that I want everyone to hear is when you start shining your light brighter and brighter, it's going to show your truth as well as it's going to show all the trash. And because you are in your journey, you're going to actually see it and condition yourself for the fight that you have to do. You're going to talk, psych yourself up, do all these different things. But what we're not aware of or not prepared for is the people around us that's not conditioned for this world is going to also see your brightness. And this is where a lot of people, I think, make their mistake is they say these people are dimming your light because they're jealous. And I don't think it's that at all. I think they're dimming your light or they're speaking negatively because they're not used to the fight that we conditioned ourselves for at the level that we're doing. Like
Right.
you had a family of 3 at the time,
Four.
I'm guessing?
Four kids.
4 at the time. And your spouse that you had to take care of medical bills, all these different things. You had no choice. Getting another job or that was the first massive thing that you did awesomely was you actually came up with your big why.
Yes.
And your big reason on what happens if you fail.
Yes.
And once you do that, you now have a choice.
Absolutely.
I could take this way or this way. Choose your heart is the saying that everyone says.
Yes.
And you start to walk your way through your trials and tribulations, talking to yourself and working with yourself. My question to you, which is a very easy one, is how did you utilize EFT in your journeys of your heart pot? Like your mom would call you like, man, I think you should go get a job.
Yes.
You would be like, Ma, I gotta go.
Yeah.
What would happen? When would you choose to use EFT, and what other techniques did you use to get over those hard pots?
So I began utilizing EFT on a daily basis the day my husband got diagnosed. The day we knew he had to go in for blood work, that they thought his blood work looked off. And because primarily I wanted to be present through this process. I didn't want to be behind the haze of anxiety and fear. I wanted to be present and available to my family and myself. So I started tapping just, a few minutes every morning. And then I would utilize it like the day we had to go in to get him staged to see what stage of cancer he was at. And then the night before we told our children that daddy had cancer. And so there were specific times when I would feel that anxiety rise or that doubt in me rise, I would utilize that. And I definitely utilize EFT around those limiting beliefs. So, even though I believe that women can't be breadwinners, I accept myself, right? And I would go through that, or even though it scares the bejeepers out of me to be the only one responsible for bringing money in right now, I accept myself. And so I utilized that tool extensively. I still do. It's part of my daily life because It's powerful. Yeah.
So all your therapists also does EFT as well as you?
Not all of them. They all have an understanding of it, and I have done some training with them, but they're not all certified. But they're 3 of them use it pretty frequently.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you're using EFT daily, and you're going through your hard stuff. How does that dictate to you eliminating the belief of I'm not good enough? I can't do it.
So when we use EFT, right, we start to shave away all the layers. And so as those layers were moving away, it was like, because this is all in retrospect, right? Hindsight, I'm looking and seeing, this is what I thought, this is what I believed. But at the time, it was really this exercise in peeling that onion and shaving away all that was on top of to get to the core. And the core was, I am not worthy.
There you go.
But I didn't go walk around the world thinking I'm not worthy. That wasn't a conscious thought. But when you come down to it and when it all gets boiled away, that was what was driving every single decision and choice that I made.
So what I'm like jamming away in my head about is like most people don't realize it always comes, like not always, but majority of it is our worthiness, our self-esteem. That's the crux of the majority of the reasons why we're not there. But the thing that I've been dying to say is, you said it perfectly. It's an onion. When you find something that's stopping you, you have to shave it down with whatever means you want. It could be EFT. I use EMDR. There's all these different aspects of things that's going to get you closer to who you are. Yoga, meditation, all the journaling,
all of it,
gratitudes. All it does is shave it down more and more. So eventually you're able to now say, I see you and I don't believe you anymore. I'm going to create my own. Yeah. So if you find that and you do something like that, like I would love for you to just keep on going with it, not thinking it's going to be right away. Yeah. Just let it jam away. Hindsight's 2020, like you said, right?
Yeah.
We have to get you to a place where you give yourself the permission to give yourself time to heal and make it through your process. Forever, how big and deep it is, you just have to make yourself safe enough to do so.
Exactly. And the truth is, and I'll be totally honest, I've made a lot of mistakes in the last.
Ooh, tell me some of those.
Lots of mistakes. Hiring the wrong people out of fear, like I need another clinician, or I need someone to help me with my books, and then hiring the wrong person because I felt this desperation. So acting out of fear and desperation rather than stepping back, calming, centering, like really seeing a bigger picture. I got very tunnel visioned in the beginning of this experience with this new practice. And I hired a lot of wrong people, and I made some mistakes in terms of managing those people. And I recognize now that it's because there was still a significant amount of fear that I was acting from.
I believe that doesn't really ever truly go away, because once we start to feel worthy, then there's other things that's going to come up.
Sure.
Right? So what other ones have you found out as you start to make it through?
Right. So that's the other piece. It's like, I'm worthy of doing this, but now I have to be accountable and responsible. And I've grown.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Staying in within your limits, understanding you are going to say what you're going to do and do what you're going to do, but you always have to do way more. That's so true on so many levels. You have no clue.
Right.
But I have another question. To a side note, you already know your limiting belief that was there. Mm-hmm. If somebody was listening to this and they wanted to understand EFT a little bit more, what is one place that you can work with, that I already know you work with it already, that you would do? And what are certain things you would do about I am worthy? Could you run us through something like that?
Sure. So I recommend to all of my clients that they tap twice a day. It could be 1 round, it could be 20 rounds. Just giving their body that much more of an experience of calm, because what the actual tapping does is it regulates our nervous system. And so whether they put words to it or no words to it, twice a day, do it while you're sitting on the toilet in the morning, do it while you're sitting on the toilet at night, do it while you're driving home from work, whatever it is, like stack it on top of something you're already doing so that it just becomes part of it. Mm-hmm. Because I know for a lot of people starting EFT, the words are challenging. It's hard. They don't know what to say, and so they avoid doing it at all. So don't use words to start.
Awesome.
Then I recommend, making a list of things that that you're conscious of that are limiting you. I'm afraid to make a phone call. I'm afraid to call somebody back. I'm afraid to go speak at that luncheon. Whatever it is I'm afraid to do, or my anger boils over, or whatever the issue is, make a list of those and talk about them and tap at the same time. So none of this.
How do you speak about them? Are you speaking them as a bitch session? Because this is something I go into. Do you talk about it as a bitch session, or do you stay on the uber positive, like you can make it through, or do you say the story that's really happening? Which one?
I say the story that's really true. So whatever rings true for you, as long as you're tapping while you're saying it, there's going to be a shift.
Awesome. How do you know a shift is happening?
Hang on one second. If you just talk about it, right, what you're doing is you're reinforcing to your nervous system that this is in fact a truth. If you talk about it while you're tapping, then your body gets into a calmer state where it's open and receptive to new possibilities. And you might start to notice, oh, I don't feel as angry, or I feel courageous and I'm going to make that phone call. So you might notice like a shift in perception. You might notice your body releasing energy in some way. So yawning or burping or like a shiver or something like that. Crying, right? Mm-hmm. And so what happens is with tapping, this is how I try to explain it to people. Tapping allows us, and doing tapping in talking about our truth allows our outsides to match our insides.
Ooh.
So giving an affirmation and I'm saying, I am worthy. I am, totally authentic. If that doesn't align with what's true in my limiting beliefs, my whole brain is going to reject that. Mm-hmm. And there's no chance for me to shift it. But if I am focusing on, I don't feel worthy. I am, I feel like dog crap. That's my truth. And so covering it over with toxic positivity is not going to help me shift that.
Wait, you called it toxic positivity?
Toxic positivity. Yeah.
That is awesome. I'm so stealing that one.
Yeah. But it's not true, right? If it's not true in the moment. And that's what trips people up a lot in the beginning of EFT too, is why do I want to focus on the negative? Well, you're focusing on the truth.
Damn right.
To bring a shift.
So many people hide from that. They just want to stay instead of looking at what's actually happening. But you said something very powerful I want to go back to because I just realized what time it is. I want to honor our time.
Yes.
Is I want everyone to remember this. If you just talk about your problems, you reinforce the problem.
Yes.
But if you talk about the problem while you're doing an EFT, for instance, to draw at a lower nervous system rate, you actually start to rebalance and can recode what needs to truly happen. That's something that I found to be fascinating when you just said that. I was like, that's absolutely right. I teach everybody, you have to lower your nervous system, lower your nervous system, but nobody knows what that means. Right. But if you're talking about the shit that you're going through and you're just having a bitch session is what I call it, you're reinforcing that behavior, that thought, that limiting belief.
Yep.
But if you do that same thing and you go through some of the tapping points, which if you need anything, I'm sure Meg will give you something, as well as I have a micro course on it as well. All you have to do is reach out. This is something that it will help you understand and have a completely different perspective. But while you're doing it, you should see, and I use the word should with air quotes, and as you start to allow yourself to let those go, you'll have some natural responses like yawning, coughing, shivering, sensation, breath change, all the things that you truly can't control will start to happen. I make people laugh by saying farting, coughing, and burping.
Yep.
Right? All these things that you can't control, they will start magically happening because your body's at a different pace.
Yep.
Now, Meg, I know we only have a few minutes left. Tell everyone how they can actually find you if they want to speak a little bit more about EFT, psychotherapy, and trauma, because we didn't get into that. We don't have enough time, but how you got into that work. Tell everybody how they can find you.
So my website is www.breathingspacepsychotherapy.com. And, we are accepting clients that live in New York State. We have some low-cost options with interns, and we also have a few insurance-based therapists right now. And sign up for my newsletter when you get on to my website, because in the next couple of weeks, I am going to be doing an EFT course.
Awesome.
Yeah. So just basics, but it will help people get started.
Awesome. So all you have to do is go to your website, get on the newsletter. On the newsletter, you'll find out about the EFT course. EFT is something that I've been using for 6 years. This is how we met, right?
That is how we.
As we go through this more and more, you'll start getting more and more at ease. But I would like to say, if this podcast absolutely resonated with you, if you liked what you heard, please share it with a friend, because somebody else could use the EFT, could use the fact that we all feel somewhat unworthy, and how we get through it is by peeling our own onion and taking our time with it while shining the light brighter and not letting anyone dim their stuff because they're not used to the work that you are doing. You were doing the work. Don't let anybody else do it. So if this podcast resonated well with you, please share it with someone that actually cares. Meg, please say bye. I don't want to keep you any longer. I love you, Mama.
Love you too, Patrick. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Well, bye-bye.